All right, recording has started. We have just finished going through the usual rules. If you're watching this recording and you don't know those, then please check them out on top of the study hall page or watch one of the older recordings. So today's topic is more critical reasoning passages with statistics. And the other topic is that the good guys won the NCAA men's tournament, so awesome. Okay, passages containing statistics. So, again, if you're just showing up, smiley face means that smiley face. It's not please don't type in the chat box. That would be sort of... There's a couple of you, KSAP2 and Franklin, who type smiley faces in the chat box. Please find this one and use it. We don't want 40 people putting smileys in the chat box at the same time is kind of the idea here. So as far as the questions, unless they are otherwise indicated, they are from gmatprep software, which is copyright GMAT. I think we are obligated to provide that notice in written form. So here's that notice in written form. Unless otherwise specified, all problems are copyright GMAT and are from the gmatprep free software. Okay, I think all of today's problems are from the gmatprep software. So that's where they are from. They are official problems. By the way, guys, when you submit problems, you should have a prejudice in favor of official problems. This is one thing that is a really big thing on the forums, is people just submit problems that they don't even know where the problems are from. And honestly, guys, if you have a verbal problem on your hands and you don't know the source, you really shouldn't be studying that problem, because most verbal problems from random sources are just so bad. So you want to make sure that you don't subject yourself to that. Probably the worst in sentence correction. I mean, sentence correction problems from non-accredited sources are just absurdly bad. I mean, on some forums, the like majority of the sentence corrections that are posted are just these horrible, horrible things. So you should have preference for official problems. In terms of critical reasoning and reading comp, there are way more official problems than you could reasonably ever need. Between the OG supplement, and the GMATprep, there's like 500 of them. So no one's really going to need more than 500 critical reasoning problems. And as far as reading passages goes, same sort of thing. There's way more than you would really ever want. So try to stick with those if at all possible. Okay. Multiple choice questions. These are all multiple choice questions. Here's where you will find your options. The A, B, C, D, E options. Please do not post your answer in the chat box. Thank you. And the other point that we always make every time in every session is please don't not answer the questions. Don't not. Meaning please actually answer all of the questions. Because on the test, that's how it works. There's no option to leave a question blank on the test. So, I mean, obviously in a study hall environment, I can't really force anybody to answer the question, but if you want to prepare yourself for the test that you are actually going to eventually sit down and take, then this is what you want to do. So, all right, smiley face, if all of that makes sense, that smiley face, and then we will look at some problems. Sweet. Okay, so let's take a look at a problem. How about this one. This one tends to be fun for people. Remember, when you have a multiple choice question, please use those options. Your classmates here will not see the choice that you pick if that is an issue for anybody. So give this a shot. Here's a timer. Have fun. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we only have answers from about half of you at this point. So remember, one thing with the GMAT, in fact, kind of the thing with the GMAT, is you do have to have good time management on this exam. So in other words, you have to know when to fold them. So if you don't have an answer at this point, make sure that you pick one. I'll give you an extra 10 or 15 seconds to do that, but please don't just stare at the problem. We still have about 10 non-responders here. So again, that's where you'll find the answer choice options. So if you have to guess, even if you have to make a random wild guess at this point, then please do so. I'm looking at you if your name is Ian or Grace or Jen Rogers or Joe or Karen or Catherine. Okay. Again, you know, if you're one of the last stragglers, maybe it's a technical problem or something, but I can't force you to answer the question, but remember that that's how the test works. There's no leaving things blank on the GMAT. So don't get used to it. So here's the answers that people picked. So not a clear favorite here. I mean, we have C as the kind of clear winner among these things, but at the same time, C was only picked by about 1/3 of people who are here. So we do have, again, 7 people who didn't respond. One of those 8 is me. So, but remember, we shouldn't have non-responses. That's the whole point of the GMAT, is there are no non-responses on this test because there cannot be. So at the risk of being redundant here, you gotta answer everything all the time. So, okay, let's take a look at the problem and let's talk about it. And remember, the theme of today is, what do I do when I see statistics in one of these problems? So in other words, the questions, the operative questions here are as always, what do I do with these problems in general? And then on top of that, what should I do when there are statistics? So what should I generally do with all CR problems? And then what should I generally do with statistics on CR problems? So again, with all critical reasoning problems, what are you really trying to do? So this, go ahead and give me an indication of this in the chat box. What are you, whenever you see anything at all that is critical reasoning, what is your ultimate goal there? What are you trying to do? I mean, this is perhaps the most important point, because a lot of people are, yeah, I like Kyle's answer to this question. And there's a couple of other answers here that I don't think are so great. So let me actually take this over to the next page, and then we'll come back to this specific problem in a second. What should I generally do with all CR problems? So what I like here is this answer. In other words, what you're trying to do here above all else is to achieve an intuitive understanding of the argument. In other words, the number one goal here is to get it. And that's in two ways. Hold on a second. Okay. I'm sorry about that brief pause there. Minor disasters happening around me here. Okay, so what you are generally trying to do is two things here, and this is the point. And those are intuitive understandings of stuff. That's your ultimate goal here is the idea. So the point of reading a CR question is, number one, you have to understand what the task is that's in front of you. And then you have to understand what you are reading for in the passage. So read for something in the passage and then try to achieve an intuitive understanding. That's your ultimate goal. So the thing is, your ultimate goal is not to isolate any kind of structure or assumption or classify statements or anything like that. I mean, those kinds of things can help you if you are confused by the problem. But if you read the argument and you know exactly what it is that you're trying to do and you understand exactly what you are looking for, then there is no reason to try to classify anything. So again, let me isolate a couple of these from the chat box and, you know, make sure you have the right idea of what you need to do and what you don't need to do, because that is a thing. So here's what I mean. Here's what a couple of you guys wrote that is sort of subsidiary points. Someone wrote that. Someone wrote these things. Someone wrote this. You don't necessarily have to do these things. I mean, these are the kinds of things that the book does more often than you will have to do them. But the book has to do things that are actionable. I mean, that's the thing with reading a book that is a book. I mean, a book cannot tell you this and then just leave that standing. I mean, a book has to contain concrete illustrations of things. When the goal is this intuitive understanding, you know, the book is going to make things look more concrete than they really need to be. So, but the point is that these things are not the end goal. I mean, if you are confused about the things above, then this can help. But in general, you shouldn't really have to do any of these things unless you are confused. So if you get it, then you should not do any of these things. However, they could possibly help you if you are confused by the problem. So if you need the help, then you might get it from these kinds of things. On the other hand, the most important thing to say is this. And then, yeah, by read for something, we'll get there in a second. But make sure that you understand the task at hand. Because someone said create a conclusion based on the given information. Maybe, but usually not. So, meaning understand the actual task. In other words, what do I have to do with this passage is the real point here. And I mean, depending on what the problem is asking you to do, then you should maybe do it or maybe not. So like this person says create a conclusion. In most problems, you absolutely do not have to create conclusions. So in most problems, no. But if the problem says that you should, then you have to do that. That's basically the point. So not unless the problem asks you to. So what I mean by read for something is that because nobody can just randomly read a thing. I mean, when you read stuff, you are always reading for something or other. I mean, depending on what it is that you're reading, the goal is going to change. You know, if you're reading like a white paper about how some scientific process works, then you're probably reading for mostly factual stuff. But if you're reading about a court case in a newspaper, then you're hopefully reading for like the point and the reasoning behind the case and not just random facts. So, in other words, in general, each task requires you to read the passage very differently. And so that's why it's important to check out the question first, because you're supposed to know what it is that you're doing before you do it. So the way you read the passage varies depending on the question. For instance, if you have to draw the conclusion, then the way they do that is they make you combine facts to make a conclusion. So if you have to draw the conclusion, then you're not trying to bother with finding assumptions. Like, there's no need to think about hidden assumptions, etc., because you're trying to just take facts and assemble them into a thing. So you are thinking about the facts that are there and how to combine them. Versus if you get a problem where you have to find strengthener, weakener, etc. You have to find something that strengthens or weakens or helps to evaluate. Just a second. All right. If you have to find something that strengthens or weakens or helps to evaluate an argument, then there's no thinking about the facts is totally not the point. You have to think about how you have to find an issue in the problem, which is find the issue in the problem. Totally different focus from drawing your own conclusion. I mean, the point isn't the stuff in the argument anymore. The point is how that stuff is used to construct an argument. So that's the difference here. So in other words, what you are reading for is going to be totally different, because then you're going to have an eye on, like, you know, external things that could strengthen or weaken the argument. So all of a sudden now you're thinking about how new information could affect the argument. So I mean, that's what I mean by reading for stuff differently. Like when you read a passage where you have to draw the conclusion, you literally do not have to think about anything that is outside that passage at all. And in fact, if you don't, it's better. Whereas if you're looking for a strengthening, weakening, helping to evaluate type of statement, you're totally reading differently for everything. You're reading, you know, you're trying to judge. You're trying to see weaknesses. You're trying to see what the issue is, and so on. So that's the point. And I mean, the point is that in the real world, this is basically common sense. You know, like if someone is writing an editorial that you don't agree with, then this is how you read it. Like, you know exactly what the point is that they're going for. you don't really care what the facts are. You look at how they are arguing with an eye to how could I counter that argument. That's how like anybody would read an editorial or something. Versus if you are, you know, say on a jury trying to reach a verdict, then it's more like this. So there are hidden assumptions. You just look at the evidence that is in front of you and see what can you put this evidence together to make a verdict. So that's kind of the point here. So on this problem, let's see. I think it's a gentleman, I'm not really sure with a lot of these names, but one gentleman, I think, wrote this. I would have to disagree with this statement. This, at least if I'm reading it the way that the author intended. The statement seems to be implying that the hardest part of a critical reasoning problem is to identify the conclusion. If that's what you're saying, then I don't agree with that at all. I mean, the hardest part is understanding. The hardest part is getting your brain back out of academic mode and back into the real world and understanding what the problem is actually doing and what it's not doing. So, I mean, if you think this next step is easy, then that means that all of critical reasoning should be easy for you. But if you find critical reasoning challenging, then this is probably not true. Or at least, if it is true, then you shouldn't even bother to study for critical reasoning. Because, I mean, if you find the strengthening weakening step easy, then you are already exactly where you need to be with this stuff, and studying will not really help. So that's the real point there. If that's probably not true for most people watching this study hall, but if it is true, then don't study. You know, get some sleep instead, or hang out with your friends or loved ones or whatnot, because you are already where you need to be. So, okay, let's talk about this problem here. So, now what should I do with statistics when I see them? I mean, what you shouldn't do is start mathing. So, don't get too mathematical. Remember that this is still the verbal section. So, and I mean, they're not going to really trip you up with things that are excessively quantitative. So if you are doing like math analysis and like plugging in numbers into an equation and things like that, then you have probably taken a wrong turn somewhere with your reasoning. So you don't want to get too mathy with it. Instead, what you should ask yourself when you see a statistic, you should basically be saying, why this statistic? Like, what does this particular statistic take into account or depend on? What does it ignore, or what is irrelevant to it? What doesn't it account for? What doesn't it account for? So that's basically what you need to do with statistics. In other words, most generally, the question is like, what does this mean? In terms of things that you could explain to someone who doesn't terribly intuit statistics. So that's kind of what you are after here, not just kind of. That's the thing that you are after here. So when it comes to read for something in a problem like this, that's what it means. So what in the world does this statistic mean is the question. The statistic that is right here. This is really the crux of this whole argument in order for new solar power plants to be more economical. Can somebody decode that for me? Like, what does that mean to a normal person? Chat box, if you have an insight into that. What does that mean? It's the point where it's not necessarily the cost of oil versus the cost of solar power plants, because oil is one component of a process that has other inputs. But let's decode that. The price to which it would have to rise. Let's write that here and talk about it. The price to which oil would have to rise for solar to be more economical. So in other words, right now solar is still more expensive, is the point. Because otherwise oil would not have to rise in price to make this stuff equal. So that's the first piece of understanding that you want, is that right now oil is still cheaper. But we don't really care what the current price of oil is. That's one thing you should understand right now. The price to which it would have to rise. So in other words, the current price is completely irrelevant here. Like, we're just saying what would have to be the price, not what is the current price. The question is asking what potential future price would have this result. So that means that the current price is irrelevant. And that means that choice A doesn't make any difference, because choice A is about the current price of oil. So we don't really care. And I mean, make analogies here if you have to. Like if I said, how much would gas have to cost before you would stop driving? That's kind of what this is. In that question, it doesn't make any difference how much gas currently costs. It's like, oh, well, if gas went up to $10 a gallon, I would think about not driving. It's like that kind of thing. I mean, it doesn't matter if gas right now is $3 a gallon or 4 or 5. I mean, it's how high would it have to go before you would think about this. So the current price is not a thing. And then the price to which it would have to rise for solar to be more economical. So the point is, even though solar has gotten more efficient, for some weird reason, like what would you expect about this price? Like if solar gets more efficient, what would you expect to happen to the point at which these things would equate? Like back when, let's rephrase this in terms of before and after. So back when solar was still not as efficient, the theoretical price of oil where these would equate, like oil would have had to increase to, let's say, N dollars to make them equal. So now what would we expect? I mean, if solar is more efficient now, would you expect oil to have to go up to N dollars anymore, or would you expect oil to have to go to less or more than N dollars? What do you guys think? You would expect, right, you would expect less because that's the whole point. I mean, it's not as much cost anymore. So we would expect that now that solar is efficient, or at least more efficient, that oil would not need to rise so far. So that is the issue in this problem, is why does it still have to rise exactly the same amount? So there must be something that is countering this. Like the only possible explanations for this. So let me get this off the screen for the moment so that stuff will fit. So in other words, the passages violated our expectations, and the question is why? So, all right. So the issue is why. And so what you should do is you should try to anticipate what you're going to need, at least generally. I mean, there are only two ways this violation could be, it could come about. I mean, that this expectation could be violated. The first way in which it could would be if something else about solar got more expensive. So for instance, and it can't be anything about the process, because the passage says that solar has gotten less expensive. So like it has actually become more cost efficient. So if you were looking for something like this, it'll have to be something external to the actual process of generating solar energy. So for instance, like if there's more taxes or something, then that could be a thing. Or something else about oil besides the price of oil has gotten cheaper. That's the other way this could happen. This is the only two ways this could be a thing, right? It's kind of like saying, you know, back to the gas analogy again. Like, what's the price per gallon that you would have to pay before it would make more sense to ride the bus instead? You know, if the bus gets cheaper, but the answer to that doesn't go down, then it means probably that something else about driving a car has gone down too. Maybe your car insurance doesn't cost as much. So it's got to be something like this. So let's look for something about oil power has gotten cheaper. Well, B is just telling us why things have occurred, but this doesn't change the picture. I mean, it may provide us with a little bit more color about why things have occurred, but we don't really care. Like, we just care that it has occurred. And then case SAP2, maybe you can elaborate on whatever point you're trying to make there. On the other hand, C is totally a thing. I mean, the efficiency has gotten higher. That means that even though oil is whatever price, we don't care. The point is that the efficiency of the plant, meaning the cost of doing everything with the oil once you have bought it, has gone down. So this is exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for in this problem. Most electricity is generated. This is not a case app that's accurate. This is not the point. We don't care what proportion of the market this is. We only care about oil versus solar, but even if oil and solar are tiny, tiny components of the economy, we don't really care. That doesn't affect this problem. And then same thing with E. E has nothing to do with the statistic at hand. I mean, it might have to do with, motivation behind drilling for oil in various places, but it doesn't affect this argument. So let's see what okay, Rajiv says this. Let's address this question. Then we'll move on here. So Rajiv says, they are asking what potential future price would have this result. I thought they were trying to resolve the issue that that if solar plants have now become more economical. The problem is that this in and of itself is not really an issue. I mean, this is a fact. I mean, facts themselves are not issues. I mean, you have to find the issue that is at work behind the fact. But you're not trying to justify facts. So the goal is to try to find the issue that underlies these facts. So, in this case, we know that solar is somehow still not anymore relatively economical. That's not the point. The point is, why not? So, I mean, it depends on what you mean when you write this. I mean, if you are trying to justify that this is a fact, then that's totally not what you're doing. But if you're trying to figure out why could this ever be a thing, then that's exactly what it is that you're doing. So I hope that makes the point here. Like, the point is not, what are the facts behind this? The point is, why did this fact turn out in a way that violates expectations? And again, if you understand that this is the point, then you are already where you need to be. And as mentioned earlier in the session, you don't need to do things like classify stuff. So there's that. No one else seems to really be typing stuff. So Rajiv is typing, but we're going to go ahead and move on pretty soon here to another test item. I mean, I'll wait a second to see what you are typing. But, okay. Yeah, so, right, Rajiv, what that means is you have to just read the argument a little bit more carefully, because that is explicitly articulated in the passage. It's like, what is the price to which it would have to? I mean, those are words that very explicitly indicate that we are talking about theoretical prices that are not the current price. And I mean, the best way to figure that out, if you don't figure that out, is to make an analogy. So, what is the price to which gas would have to rise before you would stop driving? In that case, it should be absolutely clear that we are not talking about current gas prices in any way whatsoever. We're talking about theoretical future gas prices. How much would meat have to cost before you would eat less of it? Same sort of thing. It's not how much does meat cost right now. So make analogies if necessary, is the point. So, and that's also why not A. We don't care if oil is cheap right now. We care what it would have to do in the future. All right, let's look at another problem. How about that one? Again, when you see a multiple choice question, that's where you find the answers to these things. And please pick an answer from there. Remember that this is, I know I covered up part of the question there. Remember that this is the point. So here's a timer. Have a good time. Okay, so we still have about 13 people who have not responded to this. So please pick an answer of some type, even if you have to guess. It does look like people are not, in general, finding this quite as challenging as the last one. But please pick something. There are still 13 or 14 non-responders here, so please pick a choice. Remember, you get the choices here. That's where you get the choices. So I'll give you another 10 seconds to pick an answer. But remember, the GMAT is a test where you have to pick an answer. So I'm looking at you, B, Hampton 17, Carson, Gaurav, Ian, Janae number 2. Please pick an answer. Sejuan, yeah, okay. You put it in there too. But yeah, non-answers in the chat box. Okay, so let's take a look. This problem doesn't, again, if you are still a non-responder, that's not how this test works. You have to answer all the questions, but it looks like we have a pretty clear majority for D here. So let's go through this one sort of quickly. The point here is that a reduction in the price of cereal has occurred from one manufacturer of cereal. And the point is, the argument now, since most other cereal manufacturers have announced that they will follow suit, so that's not stated as any sort of uncertainty. It's stated that we know that other manufacturers are going to do the same thing. And so the point is, the argument is saying, will the level of overall sales go up? So let's simplify. I mean, the other thing that you should do with these things is make them simpler. You should try to explain them. A good guideline to go with here is to see if you can explain it to a theoretical, like 12 or 13-year-old. So try to express the argument in terms that a junior high student would understand. A decently with it junior high student. But I mean, because when people are that old, they don't really get super academic writing, but they do understand issues. And at least that age, people are old enough to really sort of discuss an issue, as long as they know what is actually discussed and what's on the table and what's not. So that's a good way to think about these problems, is imagine you have a theoretical, like, 12-year-old in front of you. If you have access to any real 12-year-olds, that's even better, like if you have any cousins or anything like that. See if you can explain the situation to them and see if they get it. Because if there's a lot of big words in the argument, they won't get it. If there's not, they probably will. Like in the last problem, a 12-year-old would totally understand how expensive would gas have to get before you would not buy it. A 12-year-old would not understand, what is the price per barrel to which oil would have to rise to. And you know what I mean? So that's the point. That's the art here, is to try to simplify this into understandable terms. So here the point is, wholesale prices, I mean, people are not buying cereal as much. This is not an issue. Like, there's no issue behind, is that the reason? Because it's stated that that is the reason. I mean, because of here is stated with no factor of uncertainty at all. So we know that people are definitely buying less cereal because it has gotten more expensive. Because it costs more. That's stated as a definite thing. But the wholesale price are going to go down. I mean, one manufacturer did this and others are going to do the same. You can concatenate those into a single statement. I mean, basically the wholesale prices are going to go down. And so the argument says, so people will start buying cereal again. At their old levels, like at the old amounts. Okay. So the statistic that this problem references is the wholesale price. So when we talk about statistics, remember the focus is what does it take into account and what does it not. So like, what does a wholesale price not account for? Or what does it mean? So let's see if you can explain. And again, ideally, you should explain these kinds of things also in terms that a 12-year-old would be able to follow. So how would you, yeah, right? Retail price is not a thing here. I mean, to your theoretical 12-year-old, you could be like, dude, you know, this is the price that the store pays to the manufacturer. That's what a wholesale price is, but it's not the price that, it's not a market share. Market share is irrelevant. We don't care. It's the price that the store pays to the company for the stock and not the price that the store charges the consumer. So the point here is that this accounts for the wholesale price does not account for the markup that a store puts on the item before selling it to the consumer. In other words, it doesn't account for the retail price. And so, I mean, that's the only difference, right? The rest of this argument is pretty sound. I mean, because we know that cost is definitely the reason why people are not buying cereal. That's a thing. It's stated right there. And we know that wholesale cost will go down, not could or might or probably will, but definitely will. So the only missing link here is, well, will that make the retail price go down? If it will, then we have an absolutely airtight, perfect argument here. If not, then we don't. So we need to have, this is the only possible missing link here is the point, is the retail price. There's no other way that you could even attack this thing. And this is what I mean by read for something. Here you are reading for what could be the missing link here. And this is the only possible one. So there you go. So the only choice here that has anything to do with retail prices is going to be this one, the one that most of you guys pick. Marketing expenses doesn't matter because that the consumers don't care what made the prices go up. They just care that the prices did go up. This choice doesn't matter because the passage states that cost is a thing and that people will not buy as much cereal as a whole unless costs go back down. Variety, we don't care. Retail price, we absolutely do care. And then we don't care whether the decline is disproportionate in other types of cereal because we are talking about cereal as a whole. So if you have any questions about this problem, go ahead and type in the box. Franklin and Sri, you've both had text in your box for a while. So if you have just a random space or character in there, you might want to delete that. Otherwise, if you're typing a question, then go ahead and type the question. Let's move on to another one, unless there are immediate questions forthcoming here, because most of you guys were fine with that. What about this one? So again, it's a multiple choice question. You know where to get the answers. You get them here. Go for it. Okay, we've still got like 20 non-responders. So if you don't have anything written down, please pick a thing. Okay. All right, so we've got 10 non-responders. Let's see if you can get guesses. Gaurav, B. Hampton, Ian, Meena, Mohsin, Shashank Kumar, Yalin Khan. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing these things. Maybe it's Yalin John. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing these things right. But go ahead and pick an answer. Okay. Again, let's move on to the discussion here. If you don't have an answer, then you know what that means. We got a majority answer again here, so this is something we can probably discuss relatively quickly. But let's take a look. So what is the point here? So remember, when there are statistics, you should try to get down to the meaning, is the point. Not mathematically. You don't need to think in math terms about these, but then try to simplify the passage into, again, terms that a theoretical, decently smart 12-year-old would understand. So into terms that would make sense to a 12-year-old. Sure. Okay. They started making so much cotton that the market could not, basically there was an excess of cotton, and so the prices went down. And then the government said, if you don't grow quite as much cotton, we will pay you a subsidy. So that's the fact. There was too much cotton, so cotton prices crashed. So the government said, look, cotton farmers, we'll pay a subsidy if you grow less cotton. And yet, the issue here, and then in this case, they're helping you out a little bit. The issue here is specifically what the impact of this will be on the budget. And again, we would expect, I mean, it's a subsidy that's being paid from the government to farmers. So if all other things were equal, we would totally expect this to be a burden on the budget. Yes, of course we would. So the question is, why not? So the passage is saying, because I mean, we would clearly expect this to be a burden on the government budget, because there's money going out. So the question is, why not? And that's the issue here. And I mean, so you know very, very specifically what you are reading for here. In fact, you even know what you are reading for before you even read the passage, because that's in the question part this time. So you are specifically reading, you're not just randomly reading the passage. You are specifically reading for possible reasons why the government thing would have balanced either way. So why there would have been an expense associated, why the impact on the budget would have been the same without the subsidy. Because I mean, that's what this is saying. Not a net impact is code words. I mean, a 12-year-old might not understand not a net impact. But a 12-year-old would totally understand, oh, it would have been the same anyway. So that's what this means. In other words, it would have, I mean, the government would wind up paying. I mean, the government would wind up with the same, you know, balance sheet with or without the subsidy. That's what no net impact means, or no net burden is. So we're looking for a reason that would have negatively affected the government budget to the same degree that the subsidy would. So let's see what these answer choices do there. Well, this is totally a thing in choice A. I mean, the government lost revenue. So if that lost revenue, that could totally be the same as how much they would have to pay as a subsidy anyway. So this lost revenue could be the same as the subsidy. It has the same magnitude. That's the point there. Other countries, we don't really care about other countries. Nobody picked that choice, so good. The first year that the support payment program was in effect, cotton acreage was 5% below its level. I mean, what this means is that maybe it's not, I mean, the program is getting off to a slow start, because it's supposed to be 25% reduction. So what they're telling you here is the program did not go into effect super quickly. But we don't care, right? That's not an issue, because when you look at the passage, it says, if successful. So we don't care how long it takes to get there. We just care about what the result will be if it eventually does succeed. In other words, whether the plan will fail is not even an issue. It's only what will happen if it does not fail. The specified maximum meant that for very large farms, the support payments were less per acre than they were for smaller farms. I mean, we're not breaking this down farm by farm, so this doesn't matter either. We're looking at the trend as a whole. It doesn't matter what happens per individual farm. Because we're only looking at the government side of this issue, not what happens to the farmers. And, I mean, these are still the same subsidies we're talking about anyway. So this is not a thing that would cancel out the subsidy. So, I mean, if you are even considering that choice for long, then it means you've lost this focus. Like, you're looking for another factor that would cancel out the subsidy. This is still talking about the subsidy, so automatically it's not what we want. And then farmers could not use the acreage to grow any other crop. Well, great, that's the whole reason the government is paying them money. But this doesn't affect, again, this is not an offsetting factor. I mean, it may be the rationale for paying the farmers money. I mean, if they could grow another crop, they probably wouldn't need a subsidy in the first place. But that's not the point. We don't care why there is a subsidy. We just care that if there were one, then it would just cancel out the effect that's in A. So that's a thing. I think we have time for one more of these guys. We'll probably roll a few minutes over, but I was a couple minutes late, so it evens out. So let's look at one more of these things. How about this? This one's a little bit shorter, so I'll give you a little bit less time. Again, you know the drill. Multiple choice question. That's where you get the answers. Go for it. Have a good time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we still have a couple non-responses. Again, this one seems like it is not. It seems like that first problem was kind of a beast. And the rest of these, you guys are doing a lot better at. It's awesome. It means you have increased focus or whatnot. So remember, you got to answer the problem. There's still about 8 or 9 or 10 of you that haven't answered it, but let's move on. So here's the responses that you gave right there. So there's a pretty clear favorite here in choice E. The deal here is, okay, we're talking about where we should build the wind farm. What's needed, again, let's explain this to a theoretical 12-year-old. Like, how would we explain this to a 12-year-old? Well, you need lots of empty space for a wind farm. You can't build one where people live because there's these gigantic turbines that, you know, would mess things up for people. So, and then you have population density. Make sure you know what this means. The statistic is people like per what? Population density, what is that? It's people per chat box. People are shy about the chat box today. Okay, well, population density, I mean, if you guys, I mean, that population density is people per square mile. So that's a thing, although there are two things that this does not take into account. And this is what you should be reading for with statistics like this. Like, there are two things that are not taken into account here. The first is how big or small is the county. You know, how big is each county? I mean, that's per square mile, but we don't know, because remember you need vast expanses of open land here. So if one of them is really small, there may not be enough room. Sufficient vast expanses of open land. The other thing that this doesn't take into account is how is that population distributed? Because, I mean, if you look at states like California or New York in the U.S., I mean, those states don't have hugely high population densities because they have a lot of empty space in them. But the people are not randomly distributed at uniform rates across the land. I mean, if people are scattered across the countryside, then you have a totally different issue than you do if they live in cities. So if people are scattered across rural areas, the situation is fundamentally different than if they all live in urban centers. And so they're going from that to therefore county X. I mean, the reasoning here is that, so, county Y probably has more open space, so we should build there. Well, maybe not, and it's going to be one of these two things. I mean, it's either going to be county Y is really tiny, would weaken the argument, or the people in county Y are scattered all across the countryside, whereas people in county X are living in cities or in some concentrated area. So the one that, there's no choice that says that county Y is like super duper small. In fact, B is the opposite of that. If you have a population density that is lower and a population that is higher, then B actually supports the idea that county Y is really big. So, I mean, a number of you pick choice B. But this actually means that county Y is big. That'll help you. You've got a greater population with a lower population density. That means big and lots of empty. They're next to each other, but we don't care because this is not a comparison. So this doesn't let us differentiate between the two counties. Same thing with E, this doesn't differentiate between the two counties. And neither does this. Because remember, the issue is where should we build these farms, not anything else. So E, well, hey, look, everybody in county X lives like in one city. Whereas county Y is like, Tuscany, where there's a million zillion people living in random countryside. So that's kind of the point here. So we definitely want E. That's a thing. If that's true, then we would, county X might be a better place to build the farm because county X will have lots of empty space. And that's where we are. We're going to go ahead and close up shop here. Thank you for attending. If you have any quick administrative type of questions, you can feel free to ask those. This is not the time to submit submissions, and this is also not the time to ask about specific GMAT problems. Those you can post on the forum, and if you have a submission, you can post it on the Thursdays with Ron page. But if you have any admin type questions, directly dealing with company business or stuff like that, then you can ask those. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up here in a second, and I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording at this point. So thank you for attending. Good night and good luck. Again, if you have any random admin questions, feel free. Otherwise, we will see you on the flip side.